justice for all.
Okay, we will open the meeting with public comment. If anyone is here to make a public comment. Okay, moving on, we have approval of our minutes from our December 27th executive session.
Move that the Board of Selectmen approve the executive session minutes of December 27th, 2018 as presented.
All in favor? Oh, sorry, thank you.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Next item is the approval of our minutes from January 14th, 2019.
Madam Chair, I'll make a motion that we approve the minutes from January 14, 2019 open session as written.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. And finally, the minutes from our last meeting, January 22nd, 2019.
Madam Chair, I'll make a motion that we approve the minutes from January 22nd, 2019 open session as written.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Now we're moving on to governmental reports. We have first an update on the recreation complex. I think Assistant Manager Casey is going to walk us through something.
A little bit of
Technical difficulties.
So, thank you. So in front of you, and hopefully for the viewing audience in a second now, we will have the schematic for the recreation complex. And just by way of background, there have been 20-plus public meetings on this project. And for those in the viewing audience that might want to look at some of the minutes and some of the meeting notes, they're on the town's website, on the main page in the document center. If you go down to search all minutes, you'll see that there's a middle school fields complex. They have their own folder. So if residents want to go back and look and see what's been discussed, then they can do so. So there have been a few small changes to the original design. Waterfield Design Associates is continuing to refine the drawings and have submitted design packages to both the Conservation Commission and the Planning Board. So if you look at your map, one of the changes was a second half basketball court has been added to the complex near the proposed bocce court at the southern end of the complex to provide another basketball playing surface. The proposed softball baseball field was shifted to the east to provide a larger buffer between the neighborhood and that field, and that was done as a direct result of abutter input. Waterfield is also working closely with the North Andover Police and Fire Departments with respect to emergency access and security monitoring of the facility, and the Fire Department has approved the emergency access routes around the structures. The proposed parking area adjacent to the playgrounds in the main field has been constructed to also serve the new kindergarten in the ECC. Both the baseball, multipurpose, and recreation fields will have artificial turf, which will be similar to that was installed at the high school, or they'll use the latest technology. Waterfield has not yet decided on the final specifications for that surface. So the baseball multipurpose fields will have LED lighting with different intensities to serve the types of activities happening on the fields. And they've been working with Musco Lighting on the design. And the field lighting will be directed in towards the field to minimize the impact that it will have on the abutters. And it will be using more efficient incandescent lighting as opposed to what's been currently there is the incandescent lighting at Hayes Stadium. This will be LED lighting, which will have much less of an impact on the neighbors. Again, keeping the abutters in mind during the process. There'll be a concession stand that will be located near the multipurpose courts on the playground, near the Route 125 facility. And Waterfields is working with SESET Buildings, which is the same design firm as the McAvoy Field, although this structure will be larger. An additional restroom and storage building will be located towards the north end of the site, between the baseball, multipurpose, and recreation fields. There'll be a gazebo on the complex. And they'll establish an area in the site near the existing Hayes Stadium that will recognize Mr. Hayes and include a monument. And a plaque and a stone by the existing baseball field for Billy Sansucci will be relocated in the same area. And the playground surfaces will be made of rubber to reduce maintenance costs. And the sequence of construction is most likely to be from the east back end towards the Route 125 side of the complex, and it's the most efficient and effective way for the builder to actually build themselves out of the site. And construction will be coordinated with the neighboring schools when the work is in progress and during the school season to minimize impacts on the schools. Construction will be kept off of the local roads and will enter via the side of Route 125, possibly using a temporary construction entrance and exit. And based on the current project design and comments from the Conservation and Planning boards, it's expected that bid documents will be ready mid-March, with construction to begin in mid to late spring of 2019. To give some background with filings with the Conservation Commission and Planning Board, so Waterfield submitted plan designs and stormwater calculations to the Conservation Committee. A peer review was done by Horsley Witten Group, and comments were returned to Waterfield on January 22nd. And they're working with Horsley Witten to ensure that they have all of their different peer review comments resolved by the Conservation Commission's meeting on February 6th. And they also met with the Planning Board on January 22nd. Some of the comments that were made by Planning Board members and the public included, what type of artificial turf will be used, the traffic, and the impact on the local roads and the abutters. So the project has been continued to the Planning Board's meeting on February 5. In terms of fundraising, there we go. And the map is on the screen. Yay. So a meeting was held with Rick Blaine of Richard Blaine and Associates. They're a fundraising consultant. They will be assisting with the campaign for the project. And Mr. Blaine was also involved with the fundraising for the Joseph N. Herman Youth Center and St. Michael's Parish expansion. They're expecting to enter into an agreement with him early February, and the combined target for fundraising is $1.25 million. Mr. Blaine will work with both corporate and sports groups for a combined and organized fundraising strategy. They're looking to establish a signature donor that they will use to then kick off the fundraising campaign. They will have a separate bank account will be established under a 501c so that will process all of the donations. And from that, a group of 8 to 10 people will be selected from the various sports organizations and other groups who have had past fundraising experience and who will commit to the project to reach the fundraising goals. The last meeting of that subgroup was on January 16th, and they will obviously continue to meet throughout the process. And I have Rick Gorman and Rick Green here, who have also been very pinnacle in this project to also help with answering any questions. Thank you.
Where on the town's website did you say that the documents were available?
Sure. If you're on the main page, there's a document. You go to the document center. And if you scroll down to the bottom, I believe it's like second to last, search all minutes.
Oh, okay.
Yep. And then if you go to Middle School Fields Improvement Complex, in there are 3 subfolders, 2016, 2017, and 2018. And those have notes from all of the meetings.
Okay.
So a separate 501c3 is going to be established, not the Joseph Herman Foundation.
We actually right now are looking to have some answers, some questions answered from our board that had some concerns about the amount of money that was going to have to be raised. So we're working with, the Joseph N. Herman Youth Center, Inc. is working with their accountant and CPA right now to get those answers. Preferably, we're looking to have this run through as a separate line item with the Joseph N. Herman. If, in fact, that doesn't work, we would then need to go out and find another 501c that's already in existence. We don't want to create a whole 501c3 from a time perspective.
Right.
So when do they need to raise the $1.25 million by? Is there a deadline in
I
order
would say
for?
the last day of construction.
Okay.
So 2+ years.
So when would that be anticipated, last day of construction?
About,
So-
the earliest would be the end of 2020, but probably longer than that. So anytime you have a construction project, 10% is held back as contingency. On this project, 10% would be nearly $1 million. Although they've made it a conscious effort to combine the sort of sports and other philanthropy into one $1.25 million total. As the board is probably aware, the sports groups make a regular contribution, which will be part of that funding source. So to date, the balance in that account sits at just south of $250,000 already. So you could argue about, 1/5 of the total approximately has already been raised. And based upon the standard practice of those youth leagues, to be fully anticipated over the next 2 years, that another approximately $250,000 could be raised with no additional initiatives that are, obviously, they're planning. So there'll already be dollars working toward that $1.25 million total, and those could be used toward construction. But in the end, you'll need about $900,000, slightly less than that, to pay off any contingency at the end of the project as part of closeout. And I had developed the cash flow, which was provided to the CPC a couple of years ago, and it details exactly sort of the flow of funds, the order of funding this, so that the CPC would make sure they don't borrow, and that's been made public, but we can certainly reissue it again. So this would be the last of 3 funding sources: CPC, town, fundraising.
But is it the case that CPC funds can't be used for certain things, or could it be used for all of this?
There's certain aspects of the funding, for CPC funding, which cannot be used. There's certain, CPC funding cannot be used for certain aspects,
Right.
but we've aligned the CPC funding so that it won't exceed those things which they can pay for. So that's not an issue.
So we've been really successful as a town with raising money through nonprofits and private fundraising, but we don't have to look very far to Andover, for instance, to see that they were supposed to raise money relatively quickly, and 20 years later they finally got their youth center. So worst case scenario, fundraising just doesn't happen. Do we have a plan for how this project looks in the event that we can't get that extra $900,000?
Yes. So I agree with you that is a, in my opinion, remote likelihood. Is it possible that there's some balance of this? Sure, that's possible. But we're not going to be talking the difference between either having the 1.25 or not having the 1.25. It's going to be a question, is it 1.25 and have we raised $1 million versus 1.25? If you look at the project budget, which again has been made available to the public, there's a number of things, there is a number of items on that detailed project budget which are what I refer to as things. Soccer netting, items which constitute a fair amount of, around $1 million, a little less than $1 million. I would expect those items, again, would be purchased late in the program. You're still going to build your field, you're still going to put in your walking space, you're still going to put in your lighting. So the core structure, which is, 3/4 plus, if not more, of the total project will be funded anyway. We'll be talking about purchasing those items which support the overall use of the space. So I feel, regardless of the outcome, and I know that these folks will be working aggressively toward meeting the goal, this project is deliverable with what everybody expects, even if for some reason at the time that they need all the funding, they're not quite there yet.
So with that budget, I don't know if this is just a technical item, so on my phone and on my computer, that document section that we were directed to is an opening, so I don't know if anyone else is having better luck.
Which item is it, the budget item?
Search, yeah, so is it under also search, is it under the search all minutes section of the document center?
I'm sure it is.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
When it
Every
opens.
document associated with this project is online. In addition to those which were included as either CPC minutes or part of town meeting. Yep. So it's not, and I know the board knows this, but for those folks at home, it's not as if we're going to wait for the fundraising initiative to take 1.5 years or 2 years, get to the total and start. That's not what we're talking about. The project was designed to get substantially complete while the fundraising was ongoing, because I think as you go through a fundraising process and people can start to see the deliverables, it assists in the fundraising process because people realize that this particular project is coming out of the ground and there'll be successes along the way that any fundraising initiative can embrace to further propel other fundraising initiatives.
So, could you elaborate a little bit on the different roles of the different groups involved in this project. The town, the middle school fields committee that met with all the public and came up with this great design. The fundraising group, like, is the middle school fields committee kind of still existent and going to carry on with the new mission since this mission of coming up with this is complete? Or is it a separate group from the fundraising group, or is it turned into the fundraising group? Maybe, can we just understand a bit the roles of the different parties?
Sure. I'll need Rick to help with that one, because he's been involved in more meetings than I have.
Rick Ray, 357 Ray Street, for the record. In terms of the subcommittee, our last meeting was in October of 2018. We have not had any meetings since that point. At that time, we decided that the layout of the plan was pretty much cast in stone, other than changes we might need to make because of different aspects as Waterfield went through the design. So as for additional meetings, I don't think so unless we absolutely need to. I have been working with Waterfield on different aspects of the project, speaking on behalf and using my experience from McAvoy on the Town Farm Athletic Field. So some technical issues I've worked with them. I can tell you that just from the existing topography on the site, when they first looked at the redevelopment of the fields, we were looking at a cut of about 22,000 cubic yards of material. So in order to reduce construction traffic on the neighboring streets and also reduce the overall cost of the project, what we had them do was look at raising the fields. So they've raised the field, they're gonna raise the fields about 1 foot to 2 feet in different areas of the complex. That change was made without substantial differences to the existing topography. In other words, it's gonna blend in with the topography, so it's not gonna stand out like it was made that way. So that's going to save a considerable amount of traffic on the town streets and also a lot of the cost, because now instead of exporting all the material off-site, you're going to keep it on-site and reuse it. So I've been working with them. I've had several meetings with them, and they bounce different things off me. So I've been going through that, and that obviously will be presented to the different town boards. It is going through planning board right now, so they'll see all those features. They are addressing concerns that were brought up by the planning board right now. But in terms of the fundraising group will contain probably some people from the subcommittee. But what we're looking for on the fundraising subcommittee is people who really have some fundraising experience and are really driven to meet our fundraising goals. So what Rick Blaine is going to do, he's going to develop the overall strategy for the fundraising effort, and that's going to be, as Mr. Mailer mentioned, that's going to encompass both corporate ownership and sports groups. The idea is to establish a strategy and get a key donor to kick off the campaign, something that we can say is in the bank and maybe have challenge matches or something like that. But what he's going to do is he's going to take this group and he's going to go through some training as to how we present the project, so that the project is presented uniformly across the town. And we don't want the different sports groups to go out and just have little grassroots campaigns and then send a mixed message to everybody. So we want to have a uniform message when we go out and fundraise. So as Rick Gorman said, we're working with that right now, which we expect to enter an agreement with Richard Blaine and Associates very shortly, once we resolve the issues with the 501c and the establishment of that, if that will be a problem. I raised it at the Youth Center board meeting last week. Some of the questions that came up were about just different issues. So we're working with the CPA group now to try to get some answers on that, and we'll move forward with that.
So the group, the working group is completed. They're the ones who designed the project, as you know. We have a couple of members on that group. The next phase is a group that'll do the fundraising. That can include no town employees, because fundraising is not something we can do for our own project. So Rick Gorman, I believe that's correct. You may want to get council opinion, but I've historically believed that to be correct. Rick Gorman will step off of that, or he's been actively involved, obviously, in a lot of these conversations. So the fundraising will be its own entity, and it cannot include town employees that ultimately will sort of deliver on that. The town's role with Rick, really, in an unusual way, but in a very positive way, is that Rick has been our point of contact with the a design firm. When Rick bumps into issues that have questions, he comes to me, and we resolve those. Once it gets through the planning board and we go out to bid on the project, it becomes a traditional town project, where it's a town bid project, we'll get the bids back, sign contracts, and begin the construction of that with the the design firm involved, and I think in this particular case, Rick involved as well, to make sure they're being consistent on the sort of delivery of the project, like you'd expect. So that's one piece, and when it's all said and done, although I will not be here, I strongly recommend that the town develop a Friends of the Recplex group that will talk about the long-term maintenance and care of the facility. It's such a large facility, and it will have so much of an impact in the community. I think it deserves its own sort of entity, appointing a board which will be responsible for making sure, I mean, Rick does a fantastic job, Gorman, in terms of scheduling fields, but you'll have maintenance questions and use questions, and, you know, if it's an outside group, do you rent the space, all those kind of things. It's such a large asset, I think in the long term, you'd be best served with some kind of group that supports Rick Gorman and the Fields Committee. I don't think it should be just left to the Field Committee, it's too big a project. So that's sort of for a couple of years from now. So the working committee's done. We're moving toward construction, and on a parallel track, the fundraising initiative will proceed. And as they raise dollars and want to give them to the town, they got to come to you to accept the donation, so it can be put as part of the overall project.
Well, so it's a unique relationship, right? And it's certainly not in the past few years. We haven't had to have that type of partnership. So I don't know, how did you envision that working out? So, I mean, we're working to raise money for a public entity. Like, I know, for instance, in fundraising, you know, you promise sponsors different things like, you know, if you give us X number of dollars, you get your signage here or there. And the tough thing is you're raising money for a site that you don't own. So how did...
It's been that position from the beginning, that this is not a sale of name rights and a sale of assets. It's largely a contribution toward what is a betterment to the overall community's use. I think there's been some broad conversations about some kind of general sort of recognition somewhere in the middle of the space, fairly large board with, you know, levels of donation. But this was never seen as we're selling the rights to the, you know, to this space or that space to avoid what appears to be the commercialization of the project. I don't think the general belief is that that's necessary. We have a lot of business entities. We have a strong youth group that I think will support a substantial amount of the donation as well. So I think the expectation is to be some kind of large board. I know I'm oversimplifying it, somewhere in the middle of the field that would recognize donors depending on categories. But the rest of that sort of naming and selling of rights that way would be left off. They would be raising funds for the benefit of what is a community asset, with not a sort of quid pro quo or a transfer of rights in exchange for those.
Was there any feedback that, it's Blaine, correct, the fundraising consultant that you're hiring? Was there any feedback specifically from them about that unique relationship, and how do they feel the timeline for when we'd want to raise it by? Is that ambitious given the
Well,
limitations?
his agreement is drawn up for over a 12-month period. So he basically works on installments through the different months. He's at our service for those 12 months. Does he feel it's aggressive? No. He thinks it's manageable and doable. I think, again, the key aspect to kicking it off is to getting that signature donation right away. So that's what we'll be shooting for as soon as we get through this 501c establishment, whether we can run through the Joseph and Herman Youth Center. We'll get that account set up, we'll pay him his retainer, and we'll be off and running. So I think this is all going to happen very quickly.
So what do you envision that signature donation to be? Like I don't know, some, obviously significant donation from...
In the area of between $75,000 to $100,000 possibly.
Signature.
Something that we can...
Signature.
Something that, you know, there can be a challenge donation to that, or just, you know, to get the word out that we've already got money in the bank and we're on our way.
Looks like a great project, and really exciting. Hopefully, you know, the neighbors have been acceptable.
We've taken into consideration the neighbors' comments all through the public
that's
meetings
good.
we had. They've also been present at the Conservation Commission meeting and Planning Board meeting. So we have taken into consideration their comments and are doing the best, the designer is doing the best they can to address those concerns.
Anything else? Super excited about this
perfect timing.
project.
Turn that
Super
phone
excited.
off.
Thank you guys for coming in and
Thank
giving
you.
us an update.
Thanks, Vic.
So I think the last point we'll make is we'll just look for regular updates as we progress forward on this project.
And that they know that they can come to us
Yes.
as selectmen, I mean, if there are questions or things come up, I mean,
You're talking about
No.
neighbors?
It's a little distorted.
I think anybody with any interest in this project, because I think it's easy. I don't think that we forget about this, but it is such a big project and it's such a huge undertaking on behalf of volunteers
More than
that,
willing to come and give, updates to Denise and
what you need from us.
So just in conversation, because it's something that Selectman Keen has raised as well, Denise will be giving every meeting updates as to the status of this project,
Great.
and Megan will give every meeting updates as it relates to the status of the next project you're going to talk about, through the point in which we're ready to occupy those spaces. So you'll get regular updates, and Rick will be filling D in to make sure that we're up to speed on those, and Rick comes whenever he'd like. But it'll give you updates as it relates to how it's getting through the planning process, which we were hoping to get through by the end of February so we can go to bid, what the bid results are, all that kind of stuff. And I would encourage the group, as they raise dollars, don't wait till you have the total. Come in and donate the money, have the town accept it, because I think it's an opportunity to further sort of trigger positive feedback. So Dee will be giving those updates at every meeting from this point forward, if that helps.
Great. Next is update on Senior Center project.
So the board's aware at the last town meeting, working with Minco, Minco had granted to the town essentially 57,000 square feet for the construction of a senior center, in addition to the construction of a multifamily housing property of 136 units. So in the mix from town meeting to today, there had been some discussion of Minco increasing their number of units to 160 units. This is a working document. I'll show you a closer one on the senior center. But we have reverted back to 136 units, so there'll be 136 units of housing. Largely in this plan, the entrance will be modified, and the senior center, oh, right, yeah. Oh. So this will be modified. This is the senior center parcel, and this area here was really what was committed to a town meeting. Since that time in November, Minco has also purchased a single-family property here located on the corner of Sutton and Surrey Drive. So the site is actually expanding to include that as well. So that will be really the dedicated parking to the senior center. We are continuing to work on the entrance here to capture a few more parking spaces, and I'll show you on a cleaner slide of the site, to get up to the 80 parking spaces. We're struggling in this area just given the site configuration and location of buildings, but we're thinking if we pull it out, we can capture these spaces and we'll be at 80. So there is let me go to the next slide. So there's a building group that was formed that includes myself, Jean Enright, the planning director, Jim Stanford, the DPW director, the Elder Services Director, Irene O'Brien, along with two of her staff members, and the chair of the Council on Aging, Joe Sergi, along with our OPM from Hill International. So we've been meeting generally weekly, working on the programming aspects, trying to find what is the right square footage. We're basically, right now, just shy of 15,000 square feet. But when we get into some value engineering, I think we'll likely settle around probably 14,500 square feet. We're probably at about 14,800 right now, and that might get a little more flex depending upon, to meet the budget aspects of the project. And
Just so you know, town meeting was held 13.5, so
yes.
it's slightly north of that.
So we are also in preliminary areas of the elevations. I didn't want to show them yet because we'll probably get finalized. Oh, how come I can't go to this page?
It's always slow. I think it's always slow. Probably have to shut it off and turn it on. But you want to gets into the cloud and gets back down, so it's a little slow on the process there.
All right, hold on, maybe this will work. So I can give you a close-up of the building footprint and the parking configuration. As part of the process, the group went and visited several senior centers that have been done by the architect, Catlin Petrovic, including the Wellesley Senior Center, which was completed construction about 18 months, 20 months ago, and the Walpole, which literally had opened up 3 days before we had visited it. Walpole had elements that the group definitely found were comparable to the site we were looking at, and in terms of the broader multi-purpose room, which is located on the first floor where they would have, sort of the kitchen and main function areas. Programming, we're trying to maintain all the existing programming while allowing for expansion. And so there's several multi-purpose rooms that will be on the second floor, so this will be a 2-floor structure. If it lets me cast this. And let me just shut the cast off and see if I can redo it.
By the way, several members of the committee who are also senior center staff have also visited the Newburyport Center, if you've been there. It's open in the last 12 to 15 months, and it's comparable by size as well.
How does the design compare?
I'm projecting that given the nature of the neighborhood and similar to what this particular architect does, I think the Newburyport one, I didn't go on the trip to the other 2 centers, but from what I've seen of Newburyport, it's fairly consistent with what we call our hardy plank sort of New England look. And so the Newburyport Center has a nice aesthetic on the exterior. That seems like my guess would be relatively similar, I'm guessing. There's also, while Megan's looking this up.
So the site is located at 505 Sutton Street, the former Knights of Columbus site?
No, the Newburyport.
There's a school right near it, I forget the name of the street. Yep.
So this is a close-up detail of the site, so you can see the building footprint. So the building is actually a 4-sided building, so there's not really a back to the building. So that's one of the things we've been focusing on in terms of elevation, that really every side of the building is going to be seen by the public because of the multifamily units next door and a shared sort of entranceway. So the plan from a circulation standpoint would be to enter in off Sutton, enter this aspect of the site. There will be a drop-off here at the door, which is really critical for senior centers, and then a circulation pattern this way and exit onto Surrey Drive. We are, through permitting, going to look at either making this a right-hand only. We know there's concern from the Surrey Drive neighborhood, so to prevent a left turn exiting, and also this would not be an ingress to the site. You would have to come out onto Sutton Street to access the site. The parking lot configuration also, the spaces are, given the fact that it's a senior center, are wider than zoning requires, and so at present these are a little over 9 feet. They're about 9 foot 4 inches to just provide a little extra maneuvering space as the population
What's the
is
typical
older.
width?
I'm sorry?
What's the typical width of a parking space?
Typically, zoning only requires 8.5 feet, so it ranges generally from 8.5 to 9 feet in width. 9 feet would be the minimum that really is encouraged at this site, and here we even have it slightly, a few more inches, just to allow for better turning radius into the parking spaces. So the main entrance would be off of this location. We are looking to put a patio sort of in this vicinity here and have some green space along Sutton Street. This area, we're working with Minco to look at drainage for the entire site, including their property, because there has to be a cohesive nature in terms of the grading and elevations of these sites, as well as stormwater. That potentially may be some area for stormwater detention if we did any surface treatments and not underground, like under the parking lot detention. So we are in the final stages of schematic design for this project and should have an agreement on programming and elevations tomorrow. We will then work back with Minco to finalize the site. So how we did the site, which they've been a good partner on this, is we were struggling with using just those 2 parcels to meet the parking demand. And they said, okay, let's not draw parcel lines, let's get the programming and the parking on the site, and then we'll come back and draw the parcel lines. So if we have to move the entrance over, and to locate that to meet the senior center objectives and our objectives, we wanted to have that wiggle room. So the parcel lines are not set here. So that's after we get the schematic design and we get the building exactly how we want it, then we'll work to finalize the site design, and we would anticipate that to be done shortly thereafter, in about a week or two. We're pretty close right now. Then, yeah?
May I interrupt you, but, Ms. Manager, so when does this come back to the Board of Selectmen to get our approval on the design?
It's the design, just be careful of terms. All that's happening now is the interior programming of the building, not the exterior look, not the materials. It comes back, so there's still a process where it needs to go back to the seniors as well to get feedback and through that. This is just, how does this footprint, based on standard center centers, fit on the site? Programmatic is pretty standard, meaning what each space looks like. That's more done by those people who have experience in senior centers. Then it comes back to the board to, just like it does the seniors as well, to give feedback about aesthetic look, layout, those kind of more interior
And for the
things.
public to review.
Yeah.
So we will
It just
have,
seemed like it
Yeah, I think the
sounded
term,
like
sometimes we get caught up believing that we're about to
pretty well
bid
set.
next
I think
week.
that's the problem, but
Yeah,
okay.
I think in order to do I think the best way to look at it is where does the building sit on the lot that makes most logical sense?
I
And
understand that.
2, given that senior centers follow a particular format, as do police stations and others, what's the likely size of each space that's programmatic? Beyond that, some of the things like the exterior, those kinds of things that really look at the image, how it appears on the site, that's not stuff that's been
Very
done.
good.
Yep.
Glad to hear that.
so we will have some visuals at the next meeting for the boards of elevations to consider that goes along with the programming, and that would be the time where we'd want to get feedback, and we'll bring it to the board initially, and then we'll shop it to the seniors and hold some public sessions for them to review it and give comment and feedback before we go into, I forget the term that he uses, detailed drawings, so that we can get through the permitting process.
Really what you're looking at now is two-dimensional space. So if I cut the roof off the building, what does each space need to be in a senior center? Because they have each spaces. What are the approximate relationship between those spaces? So much is for, large scale, there's eating facilities. What do each of those spaces look like by state standards? We happen to be very fortunate that the architect we hired has built 50 senior centers. He's the preeminent person as relates to this. So what you'll see is consistent with what the state expects in terms of model. So sort of envision this exactly it is today, as if you're looking down into the building, where that streetscape, the way it appears on the street, will all yet to be done.
So you'll have a public input session and input from us prior to going to site plan review with the planning board? with
Yes.
this design, okay.
Megan, did you consider snow storage up there? I don't see any spots where, for snow clearing.
Great question.
So that's part of the questions we've worked with Winco on. So initially, we'd be looking somewhere in this vicinity here for snow storage. We'd also be looking potentially in this area here, which abuts sort of the rear of a residential structure for snow storage, but those are the things we're just preliminarily discussing.
We also need to, I know Megan hears from me every day, but we also need to continue to squeeze those lines to add about 7 more spots. I think we need to get to the 80, and that may mean, we're moving the lines. That's why I think Megan's approach, which is I think the ideal approach, was to say to Minco, instead of assuming the lines in advance, let's build the building we want on the site the way we want it, like this, where there's this great turning radius, and then decide where the lot lines go. Because trying to fit them into the existing lot lines would have squeezed the building inappropriately. I think you can see from this, compared to the original proposal, the idea of having the corner lot. This building now will have its own curb appeal. It'll appear as if it is a unique senior center, not part of that giant, larger residential. This is a much better sort of concept, because it has its own sort of unique
Yeah, you don't want-
location.
Yeah.
And I think in the long
Sense
term.
of presence on it.
Exactly. And so you'll see a curb presence coming off Sutton Street whenever they come back and provide that, and the architect and Megan provide that. You'll see that it'll have a curb presence. You won't be looking at the back of the building here. So I think this is a really significant improvement than trying to get it all on that lot, jamming everybody through the same entrance, no separate egress, the parking being sort of competitive. This is a much better proposal.
But you're gonna have some kind of
That
a,
extra lot. That's-
We may very well need to, in some way or another, we will need to partner with Minco to figure out how to manage that extra lot. That could be a lease or something else.
but you'll have some kind of a barrier between, like, where you're suggesting the patio and Sutton Street, right? There'll be some kind of, like, a wall or...
Yes, so
some
we are
kind of a-
contemplating some type of stone-based wall. We're also we'll be working with Minco to have complementary design aesthetics between this building and their multifamily structures, so that there's not so that there's similarities, so you don't want two buildings that are just completely different, juxtaposed to each
Right.
other on the site. So we've talked a little bit about, using similar fieldstone base materials, or if we were looking at exterior, depending upon what we select, that we would try to have complementary materials.
And as you know, Lou was involved in the building of the high school. He's very sensitive. As we built this fire station to sort of align with the high school, he's familiar with the design aesthetic of the board, or how traditionally you like to do things. And that's an advantage in this case, because we've also seen what he builds, sometimes stone at the bottom with a hardy plank up above, which is pretty consistent with what we've built. So it's been, Megan's been driving those meetings, but it's been a partnership where he understands that the outcome needs to be a synergy between the uses, and this is an absolutely better outcome than when we were originally trying to face the center from an interior perspective. Really exciting stuff.
Yeah, another exciting project, two exciting projects tonight.
Any other questions on this project? All right, thank you for the update.
Thank you.
Do you mind, before we go into licensing, if we take Mr. Cooperstein out of order?
Mr.
Since
Cooperstein.
he's sitting so patiently.
Coming to work.
He's, he likes it. He's this stuff.
Sorry, Mark.
Thought he was just hanging out back.
Spring is coming when you arrive.
That's right. I know you, well, at least you might have been interested in the recreation complex update, so.
I am, Mr. Green has already pulled me into it already. So
Good.
I was surprised, but as you know, all the hard work he does, it's unbelievable what he does for the whole community, so we're all gracious
We
to
know,
have his
but a
service.
lot of people don't know what an unbelievable job he does with
It's-
all of you, with your whole gang of,
It's amazing. We were just doing the new scoreboard at the high school, and Rick and I he's helped me on that as well, too, so he has his hands on so many things in the community, so yeah, he has to be thanked every day of the week, so
Oh,
it's
yeah.
unbelievable. Thank you. I'm here in front of you again, representing the Little League Board for this year, May 4th, Saturday, hoping to have our annual 7th opening day parade. Same rules, in line with the past 6 years. Main Street all the way down to CT, and closing it at 8:15, and then continuing to open it as we go to see down Main Street to Waverly to Dana Street. So we're hoping to have the same turnout, baseball, softball, and Challenger. So we've had great success. This being the 7th year, we've only lost 1 year, which was the 5th year due to rain. So we've been pretty fortunate and pretty lucky by doing that. So I'm hoping we will continue that as well this year and many years to come.
Yeah, we had absolutely great turnout last year.
Yeah.
Wasn't it?
Tons of people there, yeah. All right, do I hear a motion?
Mr. Chair, I move the Board of Selectmen approve the request of the North Andover Little League to close Main Street from Water Street to Waverly Road, Waverly Road from Main Street to Dana Street, and Dana Street on Saturday, May 4th, 2019, from 8:15 a.m. to 10 a.m.
second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks,
Mr. Mayor,
Mark.
good luck going forward. Thank you for everything. Appreciate it. Thank you, everyone.
Good night, thank you.
Okay, so now we can go back to our regular order of business. Motion to move into licensing?
Madam Chair, motion to move into licensing?
Second?
All in favor? Aye.
Okay, in licensing, we've just got a couple items tonight. The first is a request from Merrimack College for 3 one-day liquor license applications. And these are for events that are be held on February 21st, 22nd, and 23rd in our packets, and are all the sign-offs from the police, fire, and building inspector with no conditions. Are there any? No one's here from Merrimack to speak to it. We've seen this before. Any questions? Otherwise, I'll accept the motion.
Move approval?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Passed unanimously. Our second is a request from Smollett Farms for 2 one-day malt and wine licenses for dinners at the farm stand from 5:30 PM to 9 PM on February 14th and February 16th. We should note that in our last meeting, there was discussion about expanding the capacity beyond 20 people. At this point, their discussions are ongoing, but that has not been finalized, so they are proceeding with this application with the knowledge that the occupancy is limited to 20, and that is reflected in their application here.
So that's a Thursday, 9, I guess, what's the end time? 9?
Looks like
9
Thursday and
o'clock.
Saturday, yeah.
Yeah. So it's a Thursday and a Saturday.
That's a Valentine's.
Yeah? Yeah.
So exciting.
That's at the indoor space, sort of next to the farm, next to the.
Right,
Yeah.
right, yep. And there's a seating plan, and they've broken it all out for us to see here. But again, limited to just 20, and then includes staff, so they are working on it, but they will hold to this, and we will hold them to the 20.
I'll tell you, if they get the right crowd, what a fun night it could be for some
Huh?
group of people.
Yeah.
I'll move approval.
Do I have a second? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? None? Motion passes unanimously. And I'll hear a motion to close.
Motion to move out of licensing?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, pass unanimously. We're out of licensing.
Okay, now into consent items. We have a grant from Commonwealth of Massachusetts Executive Office of Public Safety and Security in the amount of $4,354 to be used for Student Awareness of Fire Education Program and $2,600 for the Senior Safe Program.
Madam Chair, I'll move approval, or I'll move the Board of Selectmen accept the grants from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Executive Office of Public Safety and Security.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Next item we have is a grant from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Executive Office for Administration and Finance in the amount of $25,000 for developing a gap assessment and $32,500 to develop a continuity of operations plan. Mr. Town Manager, do you want to say a couple words on this? It's
So
interesting.
every 2 years, starting 2 years ago, we apply for a community compact grant, involve ourselves in the community compact program. The advantage is that it identifies best practices, which of course we should always be looking to do. And 2, if we're accepted into the program and follow through in the program, we get extra points in other grants, so MassWorks grants and other grants. We get certain additional points by participating. I may remember 2 years ago, we did a best practice on sort of a regional initiative to try to improve the Merrimack Valley Means Business website. This year, we applied for 2 programs and received funding for both of those. One was to implement the continuity of operations plan. Not that common in the Commonwealth, quite frankly. What happens, and I think we talked briefly about this, what happens if our important assets, police station, fire station, town hall, go down and are not serviceable? I think what the September 13 events taught us was we're pretty good at some things, but we can always look to improve. The state embraced that. We're going to have a consultant come in and work with all our senior staff and others to develop a continuity operations plan that, God forbid anything happen, that puts us in a position that we cannot work from our traditional bases of where we get information. This plan would allow us to sort of pick up our laptops and go to those places and make sure we continue to operate. Pretty sophisticated plan. There'll be training at the end, tabletop exercises for departments. That's a continuity of operations plan. The gap assessment is one on the IT side. It's going to look at our existing IT infrastructure, look at best practices in IT, and determine if there are gaps within that. I think we always take great pride in the work that Chris McClure does. We feel like we're beyond where most local governments are in terms of the IT, but we're always looking to improve. And so Chris has someone who will come in who will evaluate existing infrastructure and ways of doing business on an IT basis, compare it to what best practice would be, and identify those things where we need to improve, and that'll ultimately be built into subsequent annual operating budgets. That's a great castle, by the way. It's in Scotland. They also filmed,
Are these your photos?
no,
Your vacation?
what's it, Maid of Honor? Was that the name of the movie?
That's from Maid of Honor.
From Maid of Honor. It's a great movie. It's a really good movie. Anyway, so that's my Scotland 2 cents of the day.
I thought that was the name of the.
I think it's called Eileen Dannon Castle or something like that. Anyway,
You should
so
have claimed that that was your photo anyway.
I should have claimed it. I should have.
It does say
It does say Getty Images, I see
Photo
it.
by
Are you
Owen.
hiding something on Andrew about getting background? We should
Just giving you some
know.
data. Anyway, I was just looking at this castle yesterday. Anyway, so the second will allow that gap analysis. So through the budget and through the capital plan, Chris McClure will be able to identify those areas where it need to continue to improve, and the state's going to fund that resource as well at $25,000. So we'll have 2 years to complete those projects, and when we complete them, we'll get additional points for being part of the program.
The Community Compact program was really interesting. I feel like I learned a lot more about it from the MMA conference,
great.
and I spent some time looking at the different best practices online that we could choose from to apply. So that's interesting. I'm glad you went for those.
Yep. Generally speaking, what we find, and this is a compliment to the organization, we struggle with trying to find the traditional best practices. So we originally applied a couple of years ago on the IT side. The state IT folks called us and said, you know, you're like beyond where most folks are. Same thing on the financial and the budget side. So can you look at some things that are different? So we are challenged a little bit sometimes, but it's a positive recognition of the community. Again, not many communities are doing a continuity of operations plan, and I think it's an indication of trying to find unique ways to continue to advance the organization.
Great. Thanks for the background. Is there a motion?
Madam Chair, I move that the Board of Selectmen accept the grants from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Executive Office of Administration and Finance for $25,000 and for $32,500.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Next item is a grant from the Lawrence Partnership in the amount of $67,500 for a marketing campaign. This was the gift card program.
No, this is something separate where the town manager and myself had gone back and looked to hire, through the grant funds, the folks that had done the Amazon video. And so we are working on a campaign which I can send you a PowerPoint on some thoughts. I don't want to say exactly what they are because we don't want to reveal it too early. But really it would be a North Andover eccentric branding campaign on the community about North Andover and really the spirit of North Andover, sort of from the gas disaster through today and the historical community spirit. In addition to that, we would be looking to do a video campaign, similar nature to the Amazon video, but really focusing on local officials of the business sector, new residents, long-term residents, some real estate agents, trying to really capture the trails component and open space to really highlight some of the key factors of North Andover from a business and marketing standpoint on why it's great to live here, why people would want to locate their business here or move here. So we have just initiated an initial list of potential video candidates, so stay tuned on that. And this would all be funded from the Municipal Disaster Relief Fund. We're also working sort of on a separate campaign with Andover and Lawrence to look at regionally, but we really wanted to get ahead of this and have a North Andover campaign. And we're right on the cusp of being able to, I think, move forward with that.
So who would the target audience be for the campaign? Who are we marketing to? Potential residents, businesses, all of the above?
So I think it's a reflection of what North Andover currently means to the existing residents, and it is really intended to just. The campaign is really intended to look at the resiliency of the residents and how North Andover residents have come together and business owners as a community to uplift and support each other through this disaster. But that's not something new. That's something that has really been the historic nature of the community, which makes it a great place. And so really reflecting on why did you move here to North Andover? What is it and then why'd you stay? And so it's really looking at all those things. It's why would business want to move here? Why would residents want to move here? And existing residents, hey, by the way, did you know we have all these great amenities? Because most times when you live in a place, you don't explore a place as much as you would if you visited somewhere. So to really highlight the amenities and assets that the town already has, that we want people to take advantage of, and to remind them that we have, these great schools, these great outdoor areas, swimming areas, and we're also located in a great area to access to 495, a short drive to 93. So what we intend to do with the video is have sort of a long form, almost like a chronicle type look at North Andover, that then can be broken up into segments so that we can have bumpers for social media platforms, so we can focus on specific business items, real estate items on why you should move here, or to existing residents, hey, here's this great asset, did you know about this trail, or more connecting this, and here's what aspect of local government you could have, perhaps you want to volunteer, here's the great volunteers we have. So trying to, in a small time frame, really capture probably 4 or 5 really key components, so living, working, playing, and volunteering in the community.
So do we only have access to the $67,000 if we want to do?
No, we can
marketing?
always get more. We can apply for more.
But this particular pot is only available to us if we want to do marketing?
This request is for that, to fund that specific proposal.
And so how does that we haven't talked about it in a while, but when I saw this on the agenda, it made me think about a few years ago. The Merrimack Valley Planning Commission was working on a branding campaign for the Merrimack, I don't actually know what you call it. The whole point was we don't know what to call it because it's not all of the Merrimack Valley, like it doesn't include anything after Andover, but Andover Lawrence.
Just call it Greater Lawrence.
But it's not Greater Lawrence because it goes up to Newburyport as well.
It's a struggle with the naming.
It's a weird combination. If you remember, it was.
She said the 3 communities.
No, but we've struggled.
In addition to
we
that,
understand
there's
that. We struggled. The Merrimack Valley goes technically from Concord, New Hampshire to Salisbury, Mass. And how does it? So a couple of years ago when we did that grant, I can say, maybe I'm being less filtered with 2 weeks left. There really hasn't been a tremendous progress in that, in fairness. I think it's been going through the MVPC for a while. There was sort of an initial plan that a second company brought on. I think the goal in this particular initiative was to leverage what had gone on with the gas while people are paying attention to North Andover, emphasize to our residents and business owners what a wonderful place they live in, because some of them, quite frankly, some business owners may say, gee, should I stay here? That's a fair question during these times, right? So settle the uncertainty, which is to Megan's point about reinforcing, for all of us, we know why we either live or work here, but during an uncertain time, you want to make sure that people aren't opening the local paper to see if there's another place to locate, and using that leverage, I think in the broader term, to jump off and start to advertise or promote, specifically for business purposes, in my opinion, those reasons why you should come and open your business here. So the initial is to stabilize the community, make everybody reinforce what we already experienced, what a wonderful place it is for those residents that live here and business owners. Make sure those business owners that have stayed here and weathered the storm stay and weather it longer because it's a great place. And then jump off that to a broader initiative where there's some specific branding to North Andover, because I think there's an opportunity to do that, because we have expanded our name recognition, whether we like it or not, or probably for the reason or not. So to do that as well. And this won't.
Nationwide.
Yep. And the region, because that's funded through a different funding source, there'll be actually a 3 community sort of branding as well that we're as Megan said, we're working to get ahead of that a little bit because we think there's an opportunity to do that today, just like we got ahead a little bit of offering the gift cards. We think there's an opportunity to sort of be the first entry into the market on this. Then we'll partner with the regional initiative. And the long term, when that final greater vision is painted from sort of 93 to 95, which is pretty much generally what we talk about, and over to Salisbury, then we hope that all plays into that as well. But that's been a little bit stuck in terms of getting off the mark.
I realized I hadn't heard anything about it.
Yeah.
Well, and the Tri-Town, so, the Tri-Town marketing campaign is really focused on the back to business and really is targeting the 700 plus businesses that were impacted by the gas disaster. So that's a very targeted campaign where we're trying to look at North Andover in a more broad way.
And so this 67.5 is just for the North Andover portion?
Yes,
correct.
So I see the duality of this is really a critical opportunity. Certainly, inner focusing within our board is important because you want people to kind of recognize everything here. And again, all of us are still discovering parts of this community week in and week out, historic or parts of it. So I think that's really important. And if we can, at the same time, as you say, that part about taking segments of it and attracting in, I can't tell you how significant that can be. I travel the Northeast from here through New York, Ohio, and Michigan, and there are people that when you say North Andover, they go, yeah, are you guys okay now? I mean, so there's a recognition, and the story I always tell is how great this community pulled themselves together and how it reflects on us and why it's such a great place to live and why this is a great place for people to locate their businesses. So this is an opportunity to leverage that. And that window, you know, it gets piled on by other current events. So I would just encourage you as much as possible, you can figure out a way to do those segments to new business, to real estate, to research, to education, whatever, that if you can find that access into it, I think people will look for it. It's just a curiosity, actually, for a segment of folks there. So I'm really excited about it. And I, as much as you can get input from the community, I would encourage you, because I think there are people in this community who could help shape that, as well as obviously the incredible professional excellence we have in Town Hall here. So go get it.
So what is the timeline of putting it all together? And I have a reason for asking that question.
So we are sort of negotiating over the length of the video and cost of the video, and should have that resolved by the end of the week. But we have indicated that the filming should commence quickly because town manager is leaving, and so we want him to be a critical component of that. So we would anticipate that by mid, they will really do 2 days of video shooting, and then it's sort of putting it together. So we're anticipating by the end of February, all the video will be shot. They'll also use video footage that they've taken previously in warmer months.
What do you mean?
And we were
like that just has been taken, or
It's the
they?
same company that did the Amazon.
That did Amazon, so they have footage from sort of the B-roll from that they can use. And then in addition, we've talked with Chris McClure about, if North Andover Cable then captures some things too, that we can build on it, because we'll own it. We'll own the video, and we can then take that and use our resources to expand upon that and update it, either with interviews or visual footage that can be used.
I would encourage if there's a way to team up with North Andover CAM to get pieces of their footage from the fall festivals, the 4th of Julys, from the sheep shearings, from the farmers markets, from all those events that happen, frankly, when our town looks a lot nicer as opposed to February.
Well, that's,
Yeah.
that's why I was asking that, gee, if it's all done now,
I know.
there'll be no pretty colored leaves or, get the snow while you can, but after that. And we've learned that from pictures in Town Hall that, gee, we need this season or that season. And
I would just envision this, since we'll own the product, as two things. One, we want to be the first entry into the market. We want to leverage this now. We don't want to wait 6 months when those people don't start talking about North Andover. But we view this as something where you can peel off the cover and put on a new cover. We'll own the video. Something changes, I don't think you want my face on any videos for very long. You put on something else in the front. Maybe it's seasonally changed. We've always talked about having a video component to our website. You get on, there's a greeting, not just words on a page. We think these pieces can be sort of parcelized down into that kind of nuance. You get on the economic development page, you see something else. So we see this as a product that can be modified in conjunction with North Andover CAM. If we own it and they know how to edit these things, being able to sort of modify it for message and modify it for season and modify it and continue to work on until that message, these messages don't stay very long. So maybe 2 years and the message is stale, but get in there quickly, make a hit, and continue to modify it and keep it fresh for a period of time.
that sounds great.
Yep, creating a narrative behind that. I do eventually think, Dick, that there should be some broader marketing outside of the region around specifically business. So taglines and those kinds of themes, I think, are important, and that's sort of a jumping off point from this kind of messaging. Should be all good.
For me, the number one I guess the highest priority for this video is attracting businesses to North Andover, current businesses and new business, customers to the current businesses and new businesses to
Agreed.
locate here. To me, that's
I agree.
kind of what I really hope we can
Yep.
use this for, I guess.
Well, a lot of it just depends on the demographics as to why businesses choose certain locations, but, you know, it certainly helps when the video is really attractive. And one thing I hear all the time is what a beautiful town we have. I hear it all the time, and, you know, we do, so we need to use that. So that was my question as to,
I
gee, is
know.
it all going to be dreary February, or are we going to get
No,
some?
we've wrestled with that as well.
The one other thing that's sort of, and maybe it's a little in the weeds here, but, you know, the way we get information is moving so quickly now, and that there are platforms that, you know, Instagram is basically starting to replace email, right? And so you think about that, we've got this video out here, how do you link those two? Because part of keeping it fresh is refreshing the message or waking up to it. And so I would just encourage some thought, and maybe you're already down that road of how do you keep pinging it with Instagram and some of these other things that let you get that ongoing visibility.
Well, we do, all our platforms are connected, so it would be LinkedIn,
Yep.
Facebook, Twitter,
Yep.
and Instagram. And then again, if you look at this as something that is a raw product, rather than hiring the consultant all the time, goes to North Andover CAM, and we just keep on
Yep.
adding the new visual so that we don't say, hey, I saw that person, they moved out of town 4 years ago. Use something that's current. Then I think if we have the raw footage, which isn't the case of how we, you know, proceeded to get through Amazon, then you're constantly refreshing that.
Yep.
Now, video message is the way to go.
Yeah.
More people are doing YouTube, you know, YouTube is part of a general message, so video message is the way to go, and websites are not really, we watch our own data, websites are not where we're getting as many hits as we do in social media anymore, so we have to stay on those topics.
Great.
But this is all working toward that, and Megan has a good handle on it, and the company we're involved in has a familiarity with the community, which is great. They know what we've been through, but they're also here during the Amazon thing, which is fantastic, so we think there's some real opportunity in that.
Great. Cool.
Madam Chair, I motion that we accept the $67,500 from the community partnership.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Next item is the appointment of 2 members of the Board of Selectmen to the Utility Abatement Review Board. There was an attachment in our packet explaining what this is, which is the fact that 2 of us should serve on this review
Yes.
board.
Don't expect a lot of business, but nonetheless, you have a role, so it's,
Without getting into much detail, we would review the applications for abatement and
For utilities, not.
for utilities,
yeah,
sorry.
it's water and sewer.
Yes, water
when-
and sewer.
After certain thresholds have been met, depending on the size of the event. They're rare.
Are we looking for volunteers?
We're looking for volunteers.
We're looking for
Is
volunteers.
that what you're saying?
Can you give us more, so we formed it back in August
Oh.
2015, it sounds like, or
No,
at
it's
least the
longer.
policy was updated. in
The policy was updated in 15, but the abatement, the board has probably existed since you adopted the enterprise funds, is a guess. I know I was involved in updating the policy in 15, but the group itself has been around for a long time.
So approximately how many abatements a year do they look at?
I don't think the board ever has met during my tenure to review an abatement, because they may get an abatement which is processed up to a certain dollar threshold. The superintendent, or what we should call superintendent, the director of the department can deal with that and say, oh, there was a mistake. It's when it reaches a certain dollar threshold, it wasn't a function of some kind of error, and then they're not happy with the director's answer, and then it goes on to this particular board. I'm not aware of one, but if you told me there were 2 or 3 over 7 years, I'd believe you, maybe. But it's a necessary, you know, so we're seeking volunteers that happen to also be selectmen, who otherwise aren't looking to do much during the day, to occasionally be available to serve on this.
That's fine. That's fine. I don't mind.
Madam Chair, I motion the appointment of Selectman Nobley to serve on this committee.
All in favor?
Aye.
One down.
Chris.
I don't mind otherwise either.
Yeah. You know there's one lined up, like, just as soon as this is done. That's all right. That's good, that's what it's here for.
All right.
There's one.
Yeah, I pretty
One.
much guessed.
Okay.
Trying to break a
I'll
trend.
nominate Selectman DiPellegero to join me on the on board.
All right, we have a motion to appoint Phil. A second, all in favor? Aye.
I was one of the people several years ago
Thank
who
you.
was on the receiving end
Thank
for a
you.
very, over $1,000 leaky property that we own. So-
I didn't realize this was possible. I refilled my pool and.
Oh, I paid the
could have.
and I paid the
So it's not
$1,000.
from those, it has to be
Yeah,
there,
it has to be an issue.
typically from a leak, but it doesn't.
It's a leak that you, if you don't know, and then it's, it was
Be
really, it was
interesting to see.
Well, it
$1,000.
does
All right,
say
thank you, guys.
Swimming pool request.
Yeah, I know.
though.
That's what I saw. I was like, oh, too bad I didn't know about that at the time. Okay, the next item is to vote on the scope of services, request for quote document that Denise put together for a recruitment firm to support us in our recruitment of a new town manager. Do we have, anyone have comments on the version that was shared?
Well, I will tell you one thing that I liked, because sometimes, perhaps maybe with new people, I like the fact that you put settled in 1646. We often get stuck with the other one and makes us very mad, so that was a very good move, and it's right at the top. But our neighbors to the south sometimes grab it, and
So I wanted to point out, I guess, a couple of things. One thing is the fact that the submissions are due back by, or the responses would be due back by Wednesday, February 6th. We had agreed in our last meeting that Ms. Casey would narrow the respondents down to the top 3, and we would meet those top 3 in our meeting on February the 11th. So I'm assuming, since you set this date, that you're comfortable that you have enough time to review them and identify the top 3. I assumed so, but just to make sure everyone's clear. So if anyone has feedback that you would like Ms. Casey to consider when she's narrowing to the top 3, we should provide that feedback to her.
Well, I guess, sorry.
No, go.
Proximity, I mean, so if we're gonna be asking them to meet with the Board of Selectmen, the screening committee, if they're, I guess we could do it on the phone or through some kind of teleconference or something like that, but, I mean, I would expect that they would be available, and probably have some kind of an SLA in there if we need to meet with them, that they can meet with us on, within a certain range, and either in person preferably, or, on the phone if it's short notice. So I guess the proximity of the.
Proximity and availability.
Yeah.
So one of the questions I had brought up with Ms. Casey earlier today was making sure that the appointment subcommittee is fully involved once they're appointed, so that they understand the actual role that they play. So I know that at point 11 it said assist the screening committee in vetting and interviewing candidates, including development of questions, and if requested, essays and scenarios. I didn't know if it made sense, so I don't know what page this is actually.
6.
Page 6, point 11.
Okay.
If it made sense to elaborate so that they actually worked with the, I don't know if this is something that would fall under them or if it should fall under you, Denise, that the subcommittee is fully versed on what their responsibilities and legal obligations are, whether it's open meeting, what documents they can release. I mean, just fully understanding, because I think we'll put these people on and they'll look for guidance, and I think it's important that they know whether or not the guidance should be coming from you in this case, or in which instances guidance should be coming from you perhaps, in which instance guidance should be coming from the consultant. And in the event that something were to happen because they didn't know, I mean, I'd like to know if that should be on the shoulders of the consultant, that they should have been educating our subcommittee, or I think that we take this really seriously, and I certainly have spoken to people about how serious that they would take it if they sat on this committee, and so, but you also don't know what you don't know, and so that's why we're hiring the consultant. So I would hope that there's no ambiguity there, that the person coming into this role would be expected that they'd really play a hands-on role in educating the committee members. Unless we envision, unless I'm speaking out of tune, and perhaps we would prefer that fall on an internal staff. I would think we'd want that in the consultant. I personally would, so.
But you said the appointment subcommittee, did you mean the search committee? Because that kind of threw me a little bit.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm sorry about that if I kept
Okay.
saying that. I meant search
Yeah,
committee.
because I thought, oh, that goes back to that. Kind of following along what Selectman DiColigiero said, the one thing that I would hope that the committee would make sure that all of the people who are involved in the selection committee are treated fairly and not have somebody just take over the whole meeting, that we put them there so that we get input from all of them and not, and it's just the personality of meetings. Sometimes there's people who speak more and sometimes there's those that don't, but we would certainly want it to be handled sort of even and fairly so that we hear from all of them, just to make the committee flow nicely. That would be important to me.
That was another thing we talked about, because it seemed like the feedback we got at our last meeting was that the chairman played a really hands-on role. And it's such a short process, and I think that all these committee members, like our board, they're all equal. And so I even went as far as saying, let the consultant. So I think that when we have questions for the town manager is always very respectful of the fact that, okay, I shouldn't be answering one individual selectman's question by emailing the whole board. But in the event that a member of the subcommittee were to ask the consultant a question, that the consultant not just go on autopilot and answer the question, but actually reflect on, is this a question that is likely that the rest of the board would have or the rest of the search committee would have? Like, I would like them to be more hands-on in that way to make sure that all 5 committee members get the benefit of the knowledge of having this consultant there so that they can advise us as best as we can.
It makes me, following up on that, makes me wonder, do we really need a chairman from the selection committee? Should the one who's sort of organizing and keeping the meeting flowing, should that be the consultant? It makes me, I don't know what would be the real purpose of a chairman of the selection committee. They all
I'm
should.
not going to pick an answer, but can I share some experiences?
Yeah, that's why.
Having been through this a couple of times. Consultants don't often sit in the meetings I've been in. They rarely, if ever, sat on screening committee meetings. And it may differ from Dee's experience. And I'm not saying there's a right or wrong answer. So I would know who the consultant is because that's who communicates in terms of schedule up, or it could very well be a staff member. But in the interviews I've had, the consultant has not, I'm trying to think, if the consultant did not sit in the interview when I interviewed here, nor, with no disrespect to Jim, having sat through it, I wouldn't have known the chairman from the 5th member on the group when I interviewed here. No member of the group, some person started with the first question, I think it was Jim, and they went around a room. So I'm not sure the consultant, in my experience historically on the town manager's side, has sat in the interview. They don't have a role in that. That's the committee's presence. And that, I think, and Dee could correct me, and I'm certainly could be wrong, at the end of this, they're still supposed to be keeping track. All this will ultimately become public.
Right.
So in the end, things like emails, so it's incumbent upon the person who's the consultant to make sure everybody knows, because in the end, all of this, when it's no longer relevant, should be part of the record.
Yeah, you have to turn it all
Ultimately.
in. You can't.
So I don't know if that helps or not, but I just...
Actually, that helps a lot, because I was
Okay.
going to ask what role in the actual, because again, we're talking about hiring a consultant, but, I mean, we created a search committee. The 5-member search committee is the one that's supposed to be running the process, and so that was, a follow-up question is how we see a consultant actually playing, like in the actual functioning of the meetings of the search committee, so that's helpful. I don't know if...
I see them more as a facilitator at that point, the
So
consultant.
one of my broader points of feedback, I think you guys are getting into more detail, but my point of feedback was in the first part of the document, page 4, where you say the following information is specifically required. I think it could be assumed under maybe item 6, which is a statement of the scope and type of services to be provided, but I want to specifically call out how the consultant would define the roles and responsibilities of all the stakeholders in the process, because each consultant is going to have their way of doing things. One consultant may say, I'm going to attend all these meetings, and I'm going to direct the screening committee, and I'm going to do this, and we might say we like that, or we might say we don't like that. So I would like to hear from them specifically what they view their role is, and what they view the screening committee's role is, and what they view your role is, or whatever. And we can evaluate whether or not we think that's what we want in a consultant.
So like their overall approach to the process.
Right. I mean, so I think it says here, something about, they should describe their process and methodology to be used in completion of the services. So ideally, I would say the roles and responsibilities are part of the process and methodology, but still, I would like to call it out because I think that's specifically important to know
I agree,
who they are proposing would do what tasks
exactly.
and when. And I think we don't necessarily, I saw you had something about, this must be completed within, 16 weeks or something. I think it's fine to have them say what their proposed timeline is, because they might say, you guys are crazy, you're saying you're going to do something in 1 week, and I think you need 3 weeks, or whatever.
Or vice versa.
Or vice
It's too
versa.
long.
Yeah, so I would like to know what their view of the timeline is. So I would kind of call out maybe more specifically where you say process to say key, tasks, roles and responsibilities, and timelines specifically, what they would propose.
Next follow-up question.
Yes.
In the form of a game chart?
Ideally, I would like a gift.
You're smart.
If they want me to really like them.
If you leave these two ladies to their own devices, they'll have it all together.
Yes, do you have another question, sorry?
Yeah, so on page 6 for point 7, where it says oversee and guide community listening and discussion sessions with town boards and committees, where does that fit into the timeline?
So that would be, let's see. While the consultant is getting back the application materials, so February, March, obviously before the interviews start. So it would be in that timeline that you would have those listening sessions if that was the board's preference.
Okay, so is that something that we should be discussing? Because obviously, hypothetically, if we wanted to do listening sessions, that could be hours and hours of additional work for this consultant. So is that something we should settle on this evening?
It would be helpful, obviously, to the
Who's the
scope,
listening
but
session for?
What, the
Oversee and
public
guide
talking about?
community listening discussion.
Who's it for?
So
Is it for your benefit, so when you go to interview them, you know?
it's in here.
No,
So
but I'm asking the question as part of that.
I interpreted when I read this point as it must be for the consultant to be able to put together a profile, but then as I reflected more, maybe perhaps is for the actual search committee to be able to feel like they have a good idea of what our community wants, because we're putting these people on there, but they're not necessarily paying attention to the day-to-day stuff, and so if it's them that's supposed to be getting the feedback, is the consultant meeting with different town employees, we'll use town employees as an example, is the consultant meeting with town employees and then bring that feedback to the search committee, or is the search committee meeting with these town employees, but it's coordinated by the consultant who picks those town employees? Again, only because it's very easy to see that this 4-line blurb could consume hours and hours of time.
I guess I see it like we're doing when we're developing the master plan, obviously not to the extent, but maybe they have a public meeting and invite the public and other folks to come in and give their opinions. I don't know that it's all that necessary or what those opinions would be, but it's just an opportunity for people to come in and kind of talk about what their ideas and thoughts are and what they would see in a town manager. That's what it seems like to me if you read the second sentence, right?
Is the deliverable of item 7 the profile?
no, because we want to have the profile done
Okay.
sooner.
Well, it says the screening quality to help inform the Board of Selectmen and screening committee on the quality, strength, and characteristics of candidates they envision for the town manager. So this is coming from a wide range of input. We've got town boards, committees, town employees, citizens, and other community stakeholders. You've got this wide range of people inputting it. So I guess, I'm seeing it as something like we did with the master plan. And
So
have,
is that how we're
opportunity.
envisioning it, one large?
It's really up to the board, but I've seen more like maybe a couple sessions broken out, because you don't want, 100 people showing up at one session and wanting to be heard. And I envision that this would happen before the interviews so that the consultant can use the feedback to instruct the committee and the board when it comes time for you to develop questions on some of the questions that you want to ask of the candidates, and that the screening committee also would want to ask of the candidates, to give a wider perspective for the screening committee as well as the board, what the feedback has been from the community, what the qualities and characteristics that they're looking for as well in the next
I
town.
mean, I see that we almost could hold this here as just a public hearing, just letting people speak, and just the notes be given to other members as well. I mean, I've seen that happen in other search committees, so I think there's different ways of handling it. It doesn't have to be done like that, but it could be done here, have a couple meetings. I don't know that we'll get tons and tons of people, to be really honest with you. I think you'll get a few.
I don't think so either.
I fixate on the town employee thing because I feel like if a town employee wanted to provide,
Well, they might not want to do it in front of us,
Exactly.
though. That might be
yeah.
written in, put in a suggestion box.
For me, item 3, assist in establishing a profile of the desired candidate reflecting qualities and attributes the Board of Selectmen believes the town manager should possess. I might put Board of Selectmen and town staff. I mean, I feel like the town staff, department heads should be giving some input into this profile development.
I mean, I have seen communities use citizen participation panels or feedback sessions, and some have not. It's just what the board is comfortable with, but I wanted to put that option on the table for you to consider.
So I guess kind of all of this, to me, raises the question of these consultants. Do these companies have a particular kind of MO? The analogy I have is like, you have an offensive coordinator, and it's all the same game, it's all the same ball, but people have different views of the field. Do any of these companies have a particular kind of personality or bent, and is that something that we should tune into because this is really about choosing the consultant, that we need to know, maybe not a bias or a tendency, but it's just an orientation. How do we pick up on that? Is that out there? Do these companies have that?
That's a great question. Not knowing who is going to finally
Yeah.
put in a bid, that's a question that could be asked, of the committee of the different consulting firms when
Right.
they come in to give the presentations on the
Right.
11th. Do they have a standard kind of format that they use? Each firm has its own personality,
Right,
as do most
right.
companies. And I think the ones that we will get proposals from have done this many times. And I'm confident we will have a good selection. And I think one of the things to stress to the consultant is that they're really taking the direction from you.
Okay.
and I think it helps, again, for us, it's a helpful direction. Like I know what I like working with our town manager. I know that there are many other people in our community that work with him in a completely different way that I never see or learn, and it's just as impactful in how our community gets moved forward. So does it, again, when we're thinking about the scope for a consultant, should we get more detailed and say whether we think it's just one general community meeting, 1 to 3 general community meetings, or should we say we'd like you to meet, one-on-one with each of our division, I think division heads is a more appropriate term than department head, but each one of our division heads, and perhaps go and meet with the Board of Health, the Planning Board, the larger land use boards, or perhaps the boards that you actually appoint members to. And does it make sense to go to those actual public meetings so it allows every one of those members to provide input instead of, I guess there are whole other parts of our town government that we aren't exposed to as regularly. And I don't want that to be missed.
Some models had, one listening session for department heads, division managers, and then there was a separate invitation to boards and commissions. So whoever, wanted to come. It's usually 2 or 3 at the most community meetings.
And then with the follow-up option, if someone could just submit something in writing.
Yeah, I would say,
Okay.
because some people are.
Because then that solves the problem, right? As we have a few,
I agree.
we go with the way Selectman Valencourt said with just a couple, 1 or 2 community meetings, but then people could follow up privately with the consultant. They'll get the contact
Give
information.
a short,
Feedback that maybe they didn't feel
feedback
comfortable
timeframe.
giving
Yep.
publicly.
Yep.
I mean, I think we all know citizens who don't want to be in the forefront, they would never come here, but they might send a note.
I'd be cautious of private feedback.
Well, we're just for that consultant to be able to take, because it's not like it's going to be polled. Every person that gets up to a microphone and expresses their thoughts to the consultant, it's not like just because they're saying it publicly doesn't necessarily mean that that point of view is widely held one way or another. And so
Yeah, I hear you, but I think we
I'm
can
just
kind of
making-
cipher
just-
through what's,
I'm just making the point that
you never know what you're going to get.
I'm just trying to set expectations for point 7, because if we're talking about, again, what are our expectations, because we're being, in order for them to be able to give us a proposal with, to meet our costs, they need to know, are we putting in 15 hours into just community sessions or 2.5 hours? And so and I want to make sure we set our expectations. I don't want us to look at this when it comes time to interview and say, well, gee, we never had input sessions, and we never had the opportunity for the superintendent to provide his thoughts, or the police chief or fire chief, and that's really something that I think is important.
I think one of the options you could do is you have Chris McClure set up a webpage so that, one, it provides where we're at in the process, what the meeting dates are, keep people apprised of that, and we can update that through NA News. But in addition to that, that you have a web component to do that very thing where it becomes part of the public record in what people are seeking. We don't really want someone emailing a consultant that's outside of the public record domain if you want to maintain a record of what transpired and what people are looking for. But Chris could easily set up something for people to just say, hey, here's town manager comment, here's what I would like to see in the next town manager. And we can put that out particularly on the social media platforms and say, here's your opportunity. We have set up this webpage and, we want to hear from you. And then it's, people have a direct dial in to do that.
It shouldn't go right to the consultant, it should be filtered from.
I mean, that's very easy to do. He loves these little assignments.
So,
Important assignments.
this would,
No little assignments in IT.
Oh, he probably already has it designed in his head. He's so
these
good.
listening sessions, though, would happen during the same time as, like, the job is posted, while we're waiting for respondents, like in that 1 month time period.
You may even want to set it up earlier if you wanted comment on feedback for the profile.
It's either one or the other. Because if you're
Yeah.
trying to get in for the profile, you're going to push the profile back 4 weeks.
Right.
If you're trying to get it in between so that it's feedback that you and the search committee have, then you can do it in between. So you got to decide where you want it. Do you want it to be somehow ingrained into the profile, or do you want it to be information provided that the screening committee and the selectmen have? That's more of a timeline question, because it does push your timeline back about 3 weeks, I think, if you do it as part of the profile.
I don't know that I would do
I'm thinking that, that's,
that.
As
Whatever,
long as our search committee-
whatever gives people a voice and expedites it, that's how I feel, but,
okay, so while it's posted, not as input to the profile, because that would delay the process. Okay.
I do have another question, kind of along this, so it's about the public input. So on point 14 on page 6, it's organize and moderate a public meet and greet session for the finalists. And so on our timeline, I assume that would fall between the April 8th and April 22nd window, where April 8th, the screening committee begins candidate interviews. How long does that normally take? Like, is that something that's accomplished all on April 8th, or is that something that would take multiple days?
I would say depending on how many
Candidates.
candidates make it to that round.
Yeah, I think this last half of the timeline is gonna, this is a target, but, because I was looking at this as well, and if those interviews take more than a week, based on the number of people they interview and/or just the availability of the screening committee and the people to be interviewed, that could stretch even 2 more weeks, because the following week is April break, so people might be gone.
It's definitely an aggressive
Yeah.
timeline, which is why it's the proposed,
Yeah.
we're trying to.
Which I was gonna, actually, that was another one of my comments, is we
Interview-
could say, the proposed, but not worded exactly like this, but give us your opinion as to any, deviations you would suggest from this or whatever, just so we have their feedback.
Interviews are typically 1 hour, so if you had 8 candidates, you're going 3 nights. You're not going to do more than 3 in one night. To give proper break between the candidates, that's 3+ hours.
Yeah.
So, you're probably talking about 3 in a night. If you have 9, it's 3 nights. If you had 6, it's maybe 2 nights.
The meet and greet sessions, I've never been through it for a town manager, but I know that in the many times we've gotten new superintendents, the public has always really appreciated that. And
But that's with the finalists, right? That's not with all, that's like,
yeah, but there will be, I just mean, so that's between April 8th. So April 8th is when they start interviews. If it takes 3 nights, the most aggressive way is that it's done by April 12th. And that gives us 10 days from, I get, in the most ambitious timeline, it gives us, right, excuse me, it gives us 10 days to get that session, those open meet and greet sessions scheduled so that the public has a chance just to meet the finalists that end up coming before us.
well, the meet and greets couldn't be April break week, right? They would have to be the following week. So I think the meet and greets would be the week of April 22nd. Is that what you said? Sorry, I was.
No, because April 20th, it could be, because again, this is an aggressive timeline, so I realize this isn't etched in stone, so the timeline that's pitched before us right now is that April 22nd would be when we interview the final candidates and make a final selection, but we would want to have the meet and greets before then, and so that's a good point. I wasn't even thinking about April break, but.
Along with that, the religious holidays that are in April.
It's the Sunday, I mean, they're the end of April break, both of them. I don't know, I only know mine.
Yeah, Passover too.
When,
Oh, this is-
21st? Passover, does anyone know when that is? So, we could go back and look at, I mean, I don't think we need to finalize that tonight. We can go back and look at the timeline with holidays and whatever. Plus, we're not saying this is etched in stone, we're giving it as a guideline so that the respondents know how aggressive we're trying to be, basically. I mean,
Given our deadline is, well, the deadline that I chose is next Wednesday, I'd like to get the document out to the
Tomorrow.
consultants, like as soon as.
Fair.
I know, I agree. Definitely.
Yeah.
Get it going.
One just small thing. I know we're very impressive with our all-in funds, but I think it's more than $107,858. I think there's a couple of decimal places.
There's some zeros, I think. Got it.
Just
Oh,
a few,
where's that?
just a few decimal. What's a decimal place among friends, right? Hey.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, right.
Thank you for putting all this
Yeah,
together.
that's,
Um,
I know that both of you have really come to the meeting very well prepared for your different presentations.
sets the expectation high. So, great.
Do we need any formal action from us, or is this informal? We do need a,
I think we're going to vote on the statement of work. I mean, do we want to just say vote with amendments as discussed?
As amended.
I mean,
amended?
Yep.
Yeah.
As amended.
As amended, I took lots of notes.
yeah.
Madam Chair, motion to accept the proposal as presented, along with the amendments as discussed this evening.
Second?
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Okay. Update regarding acting town manager. Yes, that's the next item. So, last meeting, we voted to extend an invitation or a offer to Lynn Savage, our finance director, to act as acting town manager. Do we have, were you going to
Did she accept?
make a statement about her acceptance? Okay, she accepted.
Oh.
So that's the update.
Condolences.
Stepping up.
Thank you, Lynn.
Big statement. Lynn has accepted.
We very much appreciate you stepping up, Lynn. Moving on, no new business. Town manager reports, we have links to the standard reports we get. I don't know if anyone has any questions or Andrew has any comments to make. Nope, okay. Any final comments or updates from anyone? All right then, our next meeting is Monday, the 11th.
Yes, it is.
Chair, motion that we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.